Hi babes, and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I'm gonna talk about the story of Jen Broberg and how she was kidnapped twice by a family friend when she was 12 and 14 years old. This story is inspired by the Netflix documentary called Abducted in Plain Sight that premiered in January of 2019. So it's brand new and it's so cool to watch. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Jen Broberg was born on July 31st of 1962 in Pocatello, Idaho. She was the first of three sisters, and she was described as having a really cheerful personality, really outgoing. She lived in a neighborhood where everyone trusted each other, so no one locked the doors. Her parents were really good, sweet parents to the girls. Her mom stayed at home and her dad owned a floral shop for 4 years, so she felt completely loved and secured. Jen's mom, Marianne, met Robert Birchall in June of 1972 at the church they went to. She immediately described them as being the sweetest family because they just seemed like a normal American family for the time, and they had 5 children and some of them were the same age as her girls, so they had a lot of things in common, which made their friendship so much stronger, and everyone had a best friend in between the two families, so they worked together a lot. Robert would come pick the girls up in the morning from the house all the time, to the point where they actually started calling him B, which is what I'm gonna start calling from now on the video. And B would come to the house pretty much every night to talk to her parents. He would play with the girls. They would go swimming together, do puzzles. So the girls really saw him as being the fun dad. His attentions were definitely on Jen from the beginning, which made their parents a little annoyed, especially because his fascination with her seemed a little disturbing, with him taking pictures of her all the time. But Jen loved him and trusted him. She felt like one of his children, so she really saw B as being her second father. On the fall of 1972, so 2 years before the first kidnapping, B started calling Marianne and asking if she could go drop out a sandwich at his work. So she always went, and B started telling how beautiful her body was and how beautiful she was, and she really enjoyed it because it made her feel good about herself. But at the same time, she didn't want to destroy her marriage and her family, so she ignored it, even though she was starting to feel things for him, especially because they eventually kissed and hugged and he touched her breasts. But she really didn't want to leave her husband and her family behind. Even though B had a lot of knowledge in the sexual field, it didn't have a good sexual relationship with his wife. So one day he drove to Jen's dad's store and asked if they could go for a ride. They get in the car and start driving, and B eventually stops the car and convinces her dad to masturbate him. At this point, both her parents have cheated on each other with the same person, and he played them so perfectly and knew exactly what to do to get them out of the way, and they fell right into their trap. In June of 1973, Jen went with the Birchall family on a vacation to Seattle. When they came back, B started telling these bizarre stories about Jen and how she was rocking back and forth one day at dinner and saying crazy things, to the point where he had to take her back to the room. In the room, Jen remembers seeing him naked, and she doesn't have many recollections because she was in and out of sleep. According to the FBI, in January of 1974, B was reprimanded by the High Council of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because of his involvement with another little girl. The church then decided to cancel him, so he went to a council in Idaho Falls. He also says that he went to California to a clinical psychologist to help him overcome his obsession with Jen. But when he came back, B told Jen's parents that he was being treated for trauma that he had suffered as a child, and part of his therapy was to spend some time with their daughters. They didn't really feel comfortable with it, but they realized that, it's part of his therapy, so it's gonna help. So they agreed to letting B spend some time with the girls. The FBI later found out that the guy he had went to in California wasn't even a licensed psychologist because he had had his license revoked. He also gave Bob these weird tapes that he would play while he laid in bed with the girls. He was in reality molesting her and giving her sleeping pills that she thought were allergy pills. It was determined that B slept in Jen's bed at least 4 times a week for 6 months, right until the day she was taken. On October 17 of 1974, B called Marianne and asked if he could drive Jen to go horseback riding. He shows up at the house saying that he was ready to take Jen, and her mom wasn't really keen on letting her go because it was school night and she had piano lessons. But B said that if he went to pick her up from the piano lessons and take her straight to go horseback riding, that they would be back before dinner, so Marianne allowed her to go. B picked up Jen from the piano lessons, and when they got into the car, he gave her what he said were allergy pills because they were going to be around horses. By dinner time, they were obviously not back, so Marianne really started panicking, but at the same time, she just thought that maybe the car had broken down and they'd be back soon. Around 9 p.m., Gail showed up at the house and she seemed worried, so Marianne suggested that maybe they should call the state police and let them know that they had left a really long time ago and they were still not back. But Gail said that they shouldn't call because she was sure that they would be back soon. They went on a Thursday night and they didn't report Jen missing until Sunday because they didn't believe that it was something serious and they didn't want to get the law involved over nothing. Jen wakes up in a bed, but she has the sensation that she's moving, and that's when she realizes that both her hands and feet are strapped. She realizes that she has a tape recorder next to her pillow, and this is when these tape recorders start saying that it was time for her mission to begin. So she immediately thought that she had been kidnapped by the UFO. She was in and out of sleep, so when she woke up again, she realized that both her hands and feet aren't strapped anymore, and that's when the tape recorder started saying that they were called Zeta and Zetra and that she was actually part alien. So her mom was her biological mom, but her dad wasn't her biological dad because she had a dad in the alien planet. The voice kept telling her that they had a really important mission for her, and this mission was to let the male companion perform sexual acts on her, and they would have to have a child together by the time she was 16. The box then said if she didn't complete the mission that they had a backup plan, and that backup plan was to take her sister Susan because she was also half human and half alien. The box then said that it was time for her mission to begin and that she had to go to the front of the motorhome to meet her male companion. When she gets there, she sees B laying on a couch, so she immediately started feeling more relieved because it was someone that she knew and trusted so much. She actually thought that he was dead because he wasn't moving and he had cuts all over him and blood all over him. So after shaking and screaming at his face, he finally wakes up and tells her that they were driving to go horseback riding, and he saw this white light coming from the sky and the car started moving and shaking, and they woke up on the motorhome. She realizes that her male companion was B, and she wasn't really comfortable with this, especially because of the age difference. But at the same time, she had no sense of what's normal and what's not, because she had just been told that she was half alien and half human. When someone is afraid, you can pretty much convince that person to do anything, so she really believed that the whole situation was real. After a few weeks, the box started saying that she had to let the male companion do what makes people happy. In reality, it was molesting her, and B would just tell her that he would insert his penis just slightly, just an inch. He almost wanted the experience to be good for the both of them, which is so sickening, and I can't even believe that someone would do that. On October 22nd of 1974, so 5 days after the disappearance, the local FBI office receives a call from Jen's parents reporting the whole situation. They sent 2 agents to the house and they talked for several hours. Because B was a really close friend to them, he was a businessman, he was a part of the LDC Fae, he really was a pillar in the community. They didn't believe that any foul play was involved. The agents really had to convince them that this was a kidnapping and that their little girl was gone. After talking to Jen's parents, the FBI agents went over to Gail's house, and that's when she told them that they had a motorhome in a storage unit. When they went to the storage unit, the motorhome was nowhere to be seen, so that's when they were absolutely sure that he had taken her. B's car was a Ford, and it was reported abandoned in Rock State Park, with the key still inside the vehicle and the side door on the driver's side broken out. There was also a small amount of blood inside the driver's door. The window was broken down from the inside out to make it seem like someone had reached from the outside to the inside to grab them. He left quite a big amount of blood to make it seem like someone had kidnapped them, but the FBI agents found tire tracks and a set of footprints that they believe were from the motorhome and B. It became a nationwide search involving every law enforcement agency and even border security for Mexico and Canada, and this lasted for weeks. But at this point, they had no trace of the both of them. As the investigation went on, the FBI discovered that B had an infatuation with little girls. Even his brother describes him as being a pedophile that needed little girls to fulfill his sexual thoughts, and he even remembers a time where he found B messing up with their little sister, and he was about 12 or 13 and she was about 6. At this time, the FBI wasn't even using the term pedophile because it was so new to the law. They actually used the term stranger danger. They found out that he had tried to get 2 other little girls in Pocatello, but the parents eventually found out before he could get to them, and that's when he found Jen. Part of his behavior pattern was to destroy everything that was around what he wanted. In this case, he wanted to destroy the parents so he could get to Jen and take her easily. One time, he even offered to build a wall to divide Jen and her sister's bedroom so they could have a little more privacy. This was actually something that they had talked about, so they didn't find it strange for B to want to help, especially because he was a handyman and owned a furniture store. The 2 families had sleepovers all the time, and one particular time, Jen and her sisters went to B's house and they all slept in this big trampoline that he had on the backyard. When Jen woke up in the morning, she realized that her pants were down to her knees, and she really started feeling like kind of weird about it. And when she asked B, he said that maybe she got uncomfortable during the night and pulled down her own panties. On November 20 of 1974, B called his brother and told him to call Jen's parents to get a written permission for B and Jen to get back to the US and they could marry, because it wasn't legal in the US back then and it was in Mexico, and that's where they were. When B's brother called her parents to let them know what had just happened, they said absolutely not, and they actually convinced him to help them locate them. They were located in Mazatlan, Mexico, and the Mexican police came into the motorhome and kicked in the door and took them to this Mexican prison. When they got there, they were separated, but B gave his gold ring to a guard in exchange for him to let Jen talk to him. When B was able to talk to Jen, he said that they couldn't talk about what had happened to anyone, and that if anyone asked, she should say that they had gone on this vacation together and he just hadn't talked to her parents about it. There were also 4 things that she couldn't talk about to anyone. One was the mission, the second thing was the relaxing pills that were given to her, the third thing was the alien planet, and the fourth thing were the sexual interactions that they had had. And if she did talk to anyone about this, her sister Susan would be kidnapped, her dad would be killed, and her sister Karen would go blind. She did exactly as she was told, and even when they were trying to get her home, she just kept asking for B and telling that she couldn't come home without B. The Brobergs eventually sent back to Mexico the marriage papers and they asked for it to be annihilated. B was arrested in Mexico and eventually brought back to the US, where he was presented to a grand jury and indicted with kidnapping charges. Jen was examined by a physician that determined that her hymen had not been broken, and she also could not see any signs of sexual assault. Jen went back to school and went on with her life, but she was separating herself emotionally and physically from her family because all she could talk and think about was B and how their mission still wasn't complete. The Brobergs were told not to have any contact with B and his family, but unfortunately he didn't do that. On Christmas Eve, Gail came over to the house and asked if she could talk with Jen's dad alone. When they were talking, Gail said that she wanted them to drop all charges against B, and if they didn't, she was going to expose all the dirty laundry about them. The U.S. federal attorney was furious, and he said that there was still going to be a trial, but he didn't have any witnesses to present to the jury. So B's trial was eventually postponed and he was released. B eventually moved to Ogden, Utah to work at his brother's car dealership, but he came home every weekend and was at church every weekend. One night he went back to Jen's room and started playing the little box again that kept saying that the mission was still gonna continue and that they were making plans and preparations for them to be together and complete this mission. She was receiving notes at school with a time and a place for her to be at to receive further instructions, but she was also receiving love letters from B to what she would write back and try to get the letters to him. She really started loving him as a husband and not as a dad anymore, and this is when she started telling her parents that she wanted to marry B and have kids with him. On the spring of 1975, B was still calling Marianne pretty much every day, and Marianne would ask him all the time, why did you marry Jen? And one day he told her that if she went down to talk to him, he would explain the whole thing. So she packs her bags and goes down to talk to him and find out what had happened. When she got to the motorhome, she sits down and he started stroking her hand and her hair, and this eventually led to kissing and hugging and a sexual relationship that lasted for 8 months. B actually called Jen's father to tell him that his wife and him had been together, and this is when Jen's parents really start having troubles in their marriage. Between April of 1975 and March of 1976, Marianne and B saw each other 11 different times, and during this time, B and Jen saw each other 9 times and spent the night together alone twice. During this time, Jen's dad realizes that B doesn't want Marianne, he wants Jen, and Marianne wasn't believing on him and goes on the wrong path, so he files for a divorce. After a few weeks, they eventually get back together after Marianne telling him that she was going to cut all relationships with B. In June of 1976, so 20 months after the first kidnapping, B agreed to a plea deal. He pled guilty to a felony charge of kidnapping and was sentenced to 5 years, all reduced to 45 days, and he had to report to jail within 3 months. B moved away from Pocatello and bought a family fun center in Jackson Hole. This is when Jen starts begging her parents to let her go work there for the summer, and her dad said absolutely no, and at first her mother doesn't agree as well. But after B called her and told her that Jen was going to go anyway, even if they didn't allow her, she was going to hike on the highway and to get there. Eventually, Marianne puts Jen on an airplane on her way to Jackson Hole, and Jen's dad tells Marianne that she was going to regret this decision one day. Jen stayed in Jackson Hole for 2 weeks, and during this time she stayed on the motorhome with B. At this point, the mission still wasn't complete, so there was a lot of sex happening, and B started telling Jen that he was going to divorce his wife to be with her, and Jen was so happy because she really thought that she loved him as a husband and they should have kids together and marry each other. B eventually puts Jen back on a plane to Salt Lake City, and after she gets home, she starts showing this side of her personality, a really bad one. At this point, B starts threatening Marianne, saying that if they don't allow Jen to go, they would never see her daughter again. Marianne told him to leave their family alone, and she was not going to allow them to be together anymore, and he got really mad, and this is what resulted in her second disappearance. On August 10, Jen had been home for a few weeks, and when her parents went to her room to wake her up in the morning, they realized that she wasn't there, and there was a note on the bed that said, "Dear Bob and Marianne, you won't let me do what's right, so I'll do what's wrong. I am leaving without B and do not plan on coming back until you accept me as me. I cannot expect your religion or your screwed up morals. I just want to be me and have B. Please, before all of us are destroyed, let me go. Jen." Jen snuck out of her room in the middle of the night and got in a car with B, and they drove to California together. He enrolled her in an all-girls Catholic boarding school. B told the nuns that he was her dad, that he was a CIA agent, they had escaped from Lebanon, and that her mother had been killed, so they would appreciate them taking good care of her, and that he would come back on the weekends. Later that day, B called Marianne and said that Jen had called him and said that she had run away from home and wasn't going to tell anyone where she was. The Brobergs actually waited 2 weeks before they called the FBI agents that had investigated her previous kidnapping. The agents called B, and he just kept saying how heartbroken he was that Jen was gone, and this is when they realized that he was in the middle of it and he knew exactly where she was. On September 1st, with Jen missing for 3 weeks, B started his jail sentence. He ended up only spending 10 days in jail after having a good behavior. He then moves to Salt Lake City to live at his mother's home, and this is where he disappears from the police radar and no one knows where he and Jen are. He kept on calling Marianne, so the FBI eventually decides to install tape recorders on the phone, and these calls lasted for about 3 months. On November of 1976, so about 90 days after she went missing again, the FBI starts to search all the trailer parks in the St. Lucie City area, and this took some time, but they eventually find the one where B was and installed 24/7 surveillance on his motorhome. 2 or 3 weeks into the surveillance, the FBI agents went knocking on the door of the motorhome, and B lets them in and tells them that he has no idea where Jen is, but they realize that, he loves her, so if he knew or thought that she was in danger, he would go look for her, right? One day, Jen randomly calls home and tells everyone that she's fine and she just called because she missed their voices and missed them and loved them, and says that she can't talk for a lot longer because she has no money left. On November 11 of 1976, so 102 days after she went missing, B goes to a payphone and is on the phone for about 10 to 12 minutes, and when the FBI agents went over to the phone, They realized that the phone book was open on a page that had a number in it. When they traced the number, they realized that it was a Catholic school in California, and they called. There wasn't anyone with the name Jen Bridgetold on there, but after they explained the whole situation, they realized that she was there under the name, it was either Jen or Janice Doubler. Agents of the FBI arrested B for federal probation violation, and he was eventually brought back to Pocatello. Jen was obviously brought back home, and she wasn't happy. She wasn't the vivacious, outgoing girl that she used to be, and it really started worrying her parents. She was really distanced from everyone, especially her dad. On January 24th, 1977, Jen had been home for about 36 days, and that's when her father receives a call that his store is on fire. An investigation later found out that B had convinced two guys that were in prison with him to set the store on fire. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough to pin B for arson or the CIA impersonation, or even both kidnappings for mental defects. B was ordered into a mental facility in June of 1977, where he was released less than 6 months later. B says that the reason why he was so obsessed with Jen was because he was sexually assaulted as a child and was never made part of the family. So as long as he was taking care of his little sister after his mom was too sick to do it, he felt part of the family, and he always had the need to take care of a little girl. In June of 1978, so Jen had been home for about 18 months. The mission still isn't completed, and this is the summer where she turned 16. She asks her parents to go on this 5-week-long drama camp, and her parents realize that this is good for her. She has been depressed and she hasn't been herself, so they let her go. At the camp, there's a boy that really likes her, so one day he buys her ice cream, and when she accepts it, she immediately regrets because she remembers that B told her that she couldn't have any contact with any other man but B. That day, Marianne called her and told her that her dogs weren't doing too good, so she immediately thinks that, something bad is gonna happen because she accepted the boy's ice cream. And she starts freaking out and starts telling her mom that she needs to come home. Next day, Marianne calls to let her know that the dogs are doing fine, and then that's kind of when she realized that her dad wasn't dead, that her sister had not been kidnapped, and her other sister wasn't blind, so maybe the aliens weren't around her anymore. She was about to turn 16, so she was still really, really worried because the mission still wasn't completed, and if she found out that she wasn't pregnant, she was going to tell her sister Susan about the mission, and if her sister didn't want to go on with the mission, she was going to kill the both of them. Her birthday came and went, and she felt absolutely normal, and everything was good with her dad and her sisters. So this is when she realized that the mission was a complete lie, and tells her best friends about it, and they encourage her to talk to her parents. The number of times that B tried to engage in a sexual manner with Jen between the two kidnappings and everything else would be over 200 times. The documentary then starts telling her story 28 years later, and how she started talking publicly about her story and her abuse. B actually started to show up at the events she was talking to and threatening them that if they didn't take the book down, he was going to make their life as miserable as he could. Jen filed a stalking injunction, and she had to go to court because he contested it. She believes that he just wanted to see her up close, and she got it for the remainder of his life. B was arrested and charged with 3 felonies and 2 misdemeanors after attacking 2 BACA members. BACA are Bikers Against Child Abuse, and being in possession of a gun. He was convicted of both crimes and was going to be sentenced the week after, but because he's a coward, he took all of his heart medication, drank Kahula and milk, and eventually committed suicide by drinking it. There've actually been 6 women that have come out to Jen and told her that they were abused as little girls by B, and he was actually convicted of raping one of those girls and was sentenced to 1 year in jail. Jen eventually decided to become an actress as an adult. It was kind of a therapy for her, and she has been in a bunch of movies and TV series. So that's it for today's video. This story is so incredibly long and crazy, and it has so many details, so I hope you guys enjoyed. And please like this video and subscribe to my channel and comment down below anything that you think about the case or any suggestions, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!